Well, folks, gaze your peepers at this. Just look at it. It's a rare bird. 1983 Honda Magna V65. This is an 1100 cc. VF1100 cc. New customer of mine wants it road ready, revived, and ready to go. Welcome back to Butler Customs Motorcycle Shop. Now, like any good project bike, this one comes with 2 boxes of parts. And so I know Derek Berry likes to start in the trunk on cars and the bed on trucks, but on motorcycles, we start in the boxes. So let me get you in here and see what's in the boxes, what's come off here, what might need to be replacing, what kind of troubles they were having. Then I'm going to get you in here and show you this very unique motor position in a little bitty frame and how they made that work. This has a lot of different quirks and things in it that you don't usually see on the bike. I don't think they made these for maybe 2 or 3 years. Now the Magnas they continued making, but not the 1100. Kind of a rare thing. This is my first time really seeing one. So it's going to need some carb work. So we're going to pull these carbs. Now he did have it at I think a friend's place or a buddy or something somebody was rebuilding the carbs. However, he wants us to go through them and check them. What I've noticed is the choke does not choke, very stiff, and the throttle does not do the throttling. We're going to fix all that. Pretty sure the 4 carbs are not synced, so we'll be syncing those as well. Then we got to look at all this electrical stuff, show you the weird setup on these tanks. It's pretty unique as well. So let's look at the box of parts, and then I'll get you in here and show you a close-up of what we're dealing with. So if you got you one of these sitting in the corner in the garage, or you're looking to buy one, maybe it was your first bike back in the days, this will be a good video for you. Or if you just like Hondas and looking to getting stuff back on the road, or hey, if you're just bored, that's fine too. Today is cold and windy in Tennessee, but you know, before long we're going to be sweating like a politician in the church. So the warm's coming, but not today. Let's look in these box of parts and see what we got. So we had a rather large box, and then a Little Debbie's box, approved. And then here's all the parts that we got. Let's try to just kind of go through these a little. Looks like we have a fuel pump. Looks like we have a rectifier, the air box cover, the air filter has seen better days and actually has a nice little viewing hole for you, but we'll be replacing that. The air box, a bunch of clamps. I think that's the pin that holds the tank. Old hoses, little cover pieces. We got an old fuel filter here that probably come off the bike. Whoo! That'll tell you the condition of the tank right there. That is rust and dirt. That's all rust. So we'll be replacing the fuel filter as well. This is a diaphragm framing. So somebody's been in the carb and replaced that. Little spring that's sort of a cover over a pipe. This looks like a brake spring for the rear brake. Here's the actual peg for the right side and the stop switch. Looks like we have a reservoir for coolant. It is water cooled. That looks like a battery tray. There's a thermostat housing, battery box here. And this is kind of like a flow for collecting, I guess, just moisture out of the breather case. I think that's what that's for. Now we have a starter here and a starter here. And there's a starter on the bike. So these must be old starters. However, they are different diameters in their shafts. So maybe this was a stock one and then he tried to replace it, but it's different. I don't know, but there's one on there. So coolant hoses. We do have a brake rebuild kit, box of clamps, cover here, radiator cap, looks like old hoses off the carburetor, some coolant hoses with the springs on them, carburetor boots, the rear brake pedal, little chrome covers, and then a box or a container, what looks like all the little bolts and stuff that come off the bike. There's also, I see some jets in there, another little cover and cover there, a little bag of bolts and whatnots, some more covers that go by the radiator cover, and here's the radiator with the fan as well. So that's all the parts that came up in boxes with the bike. Now let's go over and look at the bike. All right, so here's the bike, and as you can see, this is a big old motor. It's so big that this is the rear cylinder, and you think the front one would be here. Nope. The front one is way down here, comes through the frame, sticks out that much from the frame. It's a big motor that they fit in a little bitty frame. Then you've got the 4 inline, well not inline, 4 offset carbs, and you've got this cast air breather box that is on here. So to get these carbs off, the manual says you may have to undo the motor mount bolts, loosen the exhaust, drop the whole motor down just to get these off. I'm hoping not, but we'll see. It does have dual calipers in the front, and I believe these bikes here had this anti-dive system here, which is pretty neat, but I don't know if I trust old technology like that. I don't know, anti-dive, I guess if you brake it too hard or turn, I don't know. Somebody explained that to me. Never seen that before. Got horns on the front. When he first pulled up with the horns and that light, I thought it was a Yamaha, but no, she's a Honda. Everything else looks pretty stock. Now you would think this is an oil tank, but it is not. There's your petcock. So you've got fuel that runs from your main tank down to this tank, and then this is your fuel level indicator. That's your petcock, and then you have a pump that sits on the inside of the seat there that pumps fuel up to the carburetors. So a pretty weird setup on that. This is not the original paint. You know, the paint right now is dull as ditch water, but I think it'll clean up pretty good. I don't see any big nicks or anything. I do see what might be some fuel leaking right there. And maybe it was just a nick where somebody was trying to get up under there. I'm not sure. But I do see a little bit of rust and corrosion right here. And I wonder if the seams in this tank have just let go. I'm guessing the inside of this tank is in pretty bad condition, but we'll see about that. And here's some overspray here, pretty bad overspray on this rear fender. So good indicator that that's not factory color. I don't think they ever came out with a plum color like that, but it's got everything here. Got a little boo-boo here that we can fix. but it's not been like, you know, as far as I can see, chopped up or anything. Now the wiring, they had looks like a little trouble with the starter solenoid switch, and so they routed a fuse in here. But if you look, this is all burned up and melted. I would not trust this to take me down the road. They're cheap. Swap them out. Then we've got relays, a turn, blinker, some other doodads, fuel lines, hookups for the rectifier and other things as well. Battery and all that goes back inside there. It looks like somebody has been into this cover here. There's fresh grease around the seams here. So I wonder if somebody was doing some work in here, had maybe some starter issues and whatnot. That's for the, I believe that's for the coolant, not sure. But all the hoses have been removed off the coolant just to, I guess they were working on the carburetor stuff. But look how much that head sticks out there. Isn't that wild? That's crazy. I mean, it's almost touching the fender. And then the radiator sets up above it. It's just wild. To get air actually up to the radiator where it's tucked up under the neck and the triple tree so much, they came up with a little fin on this fork cover here. And it actually fins up and shoots air up into the radiator. Pretty neat. But the starter is on there by the that's a oil filter there, and then here's the starter, and that looks newish. So I'm wondering if we'll get a crank or not. There's the front. So right now he said, hey, let's just get it running and revive it, and then he's gonna just start fixing all the things, or tires and things like that. But he does want it rideable where he can then just start, you know, replacing old things that need to be replaced. Looks like we have 25,000 miles in 21. It's got a nice cluster up here that shows the temperature. Also shows, what is that? I don't know what that says. Stealth position? No, gear position. That makes more sense. Got the key, and then you got all your lights, your high beams. Let's see what else. Your oil, your fuel. So it doesn't, I guess, have a fuel gauge. It just has a fuel low. All the switches on here look good. They feel a little gummy, especially the turns. And then there's your run stop switch. It feels good. Your starter switch is a little gummy as well. Haven't even broke the calipers off yet, but that's really the bike. Now, the fuse panel for this bike is up here in this. You take this off, and in this box back here is all your fuses and most of your wiring. So we'll be in that, definitely checking everything out. But that's a good walk around of the bike. What I'd like to do, I know we're going to be rebuilding the carbs, but I want to check what we've got. Make sure we've got compression, make sure we've got crank, make sure it's building oil pressure, all that stuff, because if we don't have good compression, then what's the point in rebuilding carburetors and doing all this work for this guy when you know, it's really pointless to do it at that time. It is shaft driven. There's no chain or anything like that, but we will check that fluid back there. Let's take a peek at this tank, see what we got down inside there, and then we'll go ahead and pull the seat off and the tank off and look more at things and just make sure nothing's been monkeyed too much with electrical stuff. So now with the seat off, we can see a little bit more. Another relay there, our wiring that runs back to the tail. There's two boxes here for each coil. And it's kind of, I guess, like you'd say a CDI box, an igniter that runs to the coils. And then in here, all of your battery sets down in there, your fuel pump sets down in there. All of this that's kind of out here sets down in there. And then you've got a rectifier that sets outside this, and then a cover. I think he's got the covers, he just left them at home in a safe place. But this tank, it's not bolted, and there's usually a pin back here. I think that's what was over on the table. This tank actually lifts up like this, and then there's a rod there that connects up to the top of the tank, and you can access things pretty easy if you're on the road. You don't have to actually pull the tank all the way off. It's pretty neat. But this tank doesn't have a pin in it. Let's get this over to the table. All right, so the tank is kind of what I expected. It does have some rust down there in it, but it will need an acid wash. We'll put some muric acid down in there and slosh it around, clean it out good, and then we'll probably red coat it, but we'll see how that acid does. Maybe it's just all kind of rust from setting, but the way that filter looked, that fuel filter, had a lot of trash in it. At least the muric acid will clean that out and get that running for us. There's not a petcock on this because it's on that secondary tank, so it's kind of easy to get the acid in and keep it in and drain it out. Then you've got that little hook there that rod goes in to keep your tank up if you ever need to get underneath your tank out on the road. So I'll go set this tank up somewhere nice and safe, and then we'll start looking at the wiring. Right, so far as wiring goes, everything kind of looks stock except for this bypass for this starter relay, but it doesn't look like the wires have been monkeyed with much at all. There's the coils, good grounds. Now what I did notice on these igniters, mice have gotten in here and they have had a party on these wires. I'm almost 100% sure that is mice, because I don't think the seat would have rubbed that, especially down in here. The seat probably wouldn't have got down in there, and it looks like it's been chewed on. So we will be replacing these wires. There's no way that's going to work like that. They're just shot and now corroded. So if the carbs did work anyway, it wouldn't run like this. And if it did, it wouldn't run good, I'll tell you that. Got the battery in, got the rectifier on, got all the connectors made. Not sure about this yet. Up here with the igniters, I took all the looms off. The mice, there was just mice houses up and under here and here. I cleaned the wires up best I can and just separated them to make sure they weren't touching anything. I checked the fuse panel in the front as well, the fuse box up here. And this top fuse will pop every time I turn the ignition on. And according to this, which y'all need to check in the manual, this cover here, it says it's a position and tail meter. I'm not sure what that is. I know tail meter, I kind of understand that. Position, if that's maybe the gear selection. So we're getting ready to test compression. So I pulled this rear plug out on the right side. So I'm assuming, and I'll have to verify, that left side front is 1, this is 2, left side back is 3, this is 4. So I'll verify that. I'm not sure. I'll have to look at the wiring and look in the book. But when I pulled this plug out, it was oily all around the threads. Doesn't look like it's been fired at all. So I don't know if this is getting spark. Now you've got these crush washers on most plugs today. Let me show you something. You need to be careful when you pull your plugs out, your old plugs, not to just toss them. Verify that washer is still on there. You say, well, I've never seen one come off. Well, there's one right there. And it is a spark plug washer. You can tell by the way that it is. So when you pull your old plugs out, guys, be very careful. I was trying to put the compression gauge in there, and it wasn't going in. I'm like, what's going on? Well, there was a plug washer. So this plug that was in there was double gapped in there. So that's probably the reason for oil, maybe, I'm hoping. But it would not have ran good like that. So we'll definitely check the other ones as well. But let me get the gauge in here. And when I turn the lights on, we do have headlights. We do have oil. Not sure what this is over here. I'll have to look at it. And we do have neutral. We have brights as well. This up here is working. This is working. I don't know about the lights on our gauges yet. I can't tell right now. But everything is working. Nothing's sizzling. Nothing's sparking except that first plug popping as soon as I hit that switch. So it's grounded out somewhere where it shouldn't be and popping that fuse. So I'll try to find it. But we want to start with this compression. And I'm glad I pulled that plug and found that extra washer in there. Got the compression gauge in, and I don't know why they try to shove such a big motor in this little bitty frame. Why didn't they just make a bigger frame? Because that was hard to get that in there at an angle with the extender on that fits for that plug. But anyway, we got it. Let's turn the key on and we'll watch it crank on this, and hopefully we get good compression and crank. 130. Thought it was leaking down there for a minute, but nope, it's holding. Very good. So we're good on this one. We'll go around and test all the other ones as well. When you do a compression test, you want to have the carbs on and you want to have full throttle. I think that gives you a little bit better reading. All right, I like using this little light because you know if it's getting it by watching the light. So what if your bulb goes out? Well, if I don't get spark here, I always verify it with a plug as well. But some of these plugs, especially on old bikes, they're fouled. They're not going to spark anyway. So if you test it with a new plug. Let's see what we've got. Ooh. Okay, that's not good. Okay, we've got it grounding out somewhere because I'm getting spark just turning the key on. And if I wiggle the key, I'm getting spark. Let's crank. No spark, but I do get spark on the key turning. This plug wire is running off this same coil back here to the rear as well. So if this is getting spark on the key turn and then no spark on crank, the same thing's happening here. Now we'll check that for compression, but let's see what this coil is doing. It might just be something wrong with this coil, and this coil is actually firing. So what I'm going to do, I know this runs 1 and 2, so I'm going to pull the wire off of here and put a tester on it. And let's see what it does. And while we got that out, we'll pull the plugs and see how that looks. Okay, so on this, we don't have that initial spark. When I wiggle the key, now let's see about crank. All right, so this one is operating properly. That rear coil is not, which I know the coil is working on the rear because it's sending power to it, but only when the key is turned on or turned off or you wiggle the key. On crank, that rear coil is not sparking. So I think the coil is working because you do get a spark just at the wrong time. So my guess it would be that igniter. Remember, we've got 2 igniters back here. You've got one for the rear coil and one for the front coil. And they're just held in this plastic housing. And I had to clean all this up because of the mouse urine and poop. So these are all been cleaned up here. They are pretty much identical in size, but they do have a different part number on them. So this is a TID1 or yeah, TID12-13A. This one is a TID12-13 MB4. So what I can try to do is swap these igniters around and see if it makes a difference in the spark on the rear. If not, then it's in the wiring and not the igniters. So what I'm going to do now is just swap these around and see if that problem now shows up on our front cylinder, cylinder number 2 that we were checking, that was operating incorrectly. If it starts operating weird, then you know it's one of these igniters. Okay, I've swapped these igniters around. So now if we get a weird spark when I turn the key and then no spark at crank, then we know that that igniter, one of those igniters is bad, and I'll trace it back to see which one it actually is. If it's the 12A or the 12 or 13A or 13. What is it? 13? What is it? If it's the 13A or the 13, then we can get another one ordered in. So let me hit that key. Tell me if you see a spark. Yep, see that? That's just me wiggling the key. And then if I try to crank, the issue with one of the coils acting goofy is an igniter. Now the wiring will need to be cleaned up, but evidently an igniter is the issue. So let me see if we can trace real quick which one goes to that, which one is the bad igniter. Okay, so I swapped the igniters around. You can see the different colored plugs in here now. And let's just see what wires. Okay, we've got the green, which is usually the ground, a black and white, 2 blues, and a blue and a white. Here we have an assortment of yellows and a green that's ground and a black and a white. So up here on our coils, on our coil pack, this coil pack is for the rear. There's a yellow and a black and a white. This coil pack here is a black and white and then a blue. So this coil pack here is what's hooked up with the bad igniter. It's a blue and a black. And so this has several blues going into it. So this right here is going to be our bad igniter. Now another way I can verify that is we'll run a test probe here from one of our multimeters in one of these 2 wires. And we'll run it back to this wire here. Take this off right here, and we'll see if we have continuity. If we do, then we know that this goes to the front coil. So let's probe these wires, make sure we've got the right igniter. Hey, I know a way we can tell. Very easy. We don't have to probe any wires. I just thought of this. What we can do to find the bad igniter, if we believe this is the front coil, let's take this out off what we believe to be the rear coil. All right? Yep. Okay. Now watch this. So we know this goes to the front coil, this blue one. Let's unplug this, plug the good igniter in. All right, so we've got the good igniter plugged in. We still have this one off. We believe this to be the bad one. Now let's see what we have on key on. Okay. Nothing. And then crank. That is our good igniter. Now we can take this good igniter, put in our rear, and see if we have correct spark at the right time for that. Okay, so now we swapped our good igniter into our rear. All right, so we got our test light on the rear now. The good igniter on the rear coil connected. Let me turn the key on. We should not see any spark. Now on crank. So I'm going to go around, check compression on the other 3, see how they are. I expect it to be fine. They sound good. but we do have this bad igniter. And so that's going to have to be replaced, because if we'd have rebuilt the carbs on this, put it together, put the coolant thing, the radiator and all the cooling components back on, and then went ahead and tried to start this bike, it would have ran, but it would have only ran out of the front cylinders, not the rear. So this is why I like personally to start with electronics. Before I start rebuilding anything, I want to know, does it crank? Does it have spark? Does all the things work on it electronically? Then compression. If that's good, then let's go start replacing stuff and cleaning carbs out and getting fuel in it and all that, because all that's really downhill stuff at that point. So when you start, that's where I like to start. Let's get this thing cranking. Let's check spark. All the other wiring stuff we can fix along the way, but it's got to have that, and it's got to have compression. So let me go pull these other plugs. We'll see what they look like. We'll see what the compression is, but we will go ahead and look one of these up. Hopefully they're not much, and put that on the list of things we will need. So this rectifier looks like the original one, and it's already melted the harness here, so you can see that. I haven't tested, of course, the rectifier and stator condition going back to the battery. We will when it's running. I would probably guarantee you that rectifier is not working. With a melted plug like that, we're going to be probably changing the stator and the rectifier on this bike. But we won't know that till we get it actually running. Then I can see how it's charging, if it's charging back to the battery. So our parts list is growing exponentially. Okay, so a list of parts that I know that we're going to have in order for this bike to run. Starter solenoid, we're going to have that. Yeah, it works, but that's just dangerous. The way that's melted in there, and it's already starting to melt the wires and the harness, and just need to replace that. The rear cylinder igniter, this is for the front one. This is the good one. We need the rear one. We'll look that up. A fuel pump, we need that. We got that 15 amp fuse that keeps popping. So what we're going to do is take all of that off in the front. Look at the wiring in there. There might be an old mouse casino that's shut down now that was up in there. And that's why we're getting that popping. If you listen, when I wiggle that key, you hear that click? All kinds of, it cuts in and out. So I bet if you're going down the road and this thing starts jiggling or something, you could lose power. I think it's in this key. So we might have to look at a key cylinder with keys to replace that. I mean, it'll run with that key. Everything else is working. I find it kind of funny. Our blinkers, we call them blinkers here, turn signals. But on this cover that tells you what the fuses are, it says winker. Winker and a stop and horn. I mean, it does wink. It makes sense. It makes sense. And winker might have been around before blinker. We might have just stolen that and said, well, I don't like blinker or winker. We'll change it to blinker. What about a horn? Man, what a horn. Got two of them up there. And headlights work good. We have everything working. Our turns work. Our high and low beam works. Our horn works. Our brake light works. The tail light was working. The cluster works. The running stop switch, I haven't tested it yet, but the starter button works. So I started doing some kind of research and looking in the manual and stuff. The way they mark these cylinders, boy, they're weird. Okay, this front left side is cylinder 2. This front right side is cylinder 4. Back left is cylinder 1, and back left is cylinder 3. Now that's according to the manual. So 2, 4, 1, 3. What's weird about that is that these coil wires, they're marked weird. So this is marked coil 4. This is marked coil 3, which is right, but you've got this wire says coil 4 and it's actually going to, I don't know. I don't understand this. This this plug wire says 4, but it's going to cylinder 1. This says 3, it's going here. This says like 1, and I don't know. It's just all, the wires don't match what the manual says is the positions. The manual seems to be right because 2 and 4 in the fronts run off this coil here, which would make sense on firing order, and then 1, 3 back here. So I don't know. It's kind of weird. So we broke everything down. I pulled the carbs off, and gentleman said, "Hey, I paid somebody to rebuild the carbs." So when I pulled the carbs apart, I found some issues. Somebody did, in fact, rebuild the carbs. I've got them all broken down and separated. I think carb 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 over here. I took the box off, broke them completely down. The person that had did the carb rebuild last time, or before me, just did like a basic carb rebuild. So he did replace the jets. He replaced the needle seat, the needle. He didn't replace the floats, replaced the gaskets, and the needle itself. I'm not sure. These look to be original, so I don't think they were replaced. So basically that last rebuild was diaphragms, which I don't know, guys. These kind of, yeah, they were probably replaced. So the diaphragms were probably replaced. The jets look like they were replaced, and the float needle and seat were replaced. That looks to be all. So there's a big problem with that. It wouldn't even choke. The choke would not come up or go down. It was seized up. So the chokes were not addressed. And as you can see, these here are in pretty bad shape. They were gummy and sticky and really, really hard to get out. So they had not been looked at or fixed. So the bike would not have choked, or it would have stuck on choke and not run well. Also, when you're dealing with 4 inline carbs and you're going to do a carb rebuild, you've got to take them apart and look at your connector tubes. Your fuel tubes that run between each carburetor, they need to be taken off, and especially these O-rings need to be replaced. If you look at that O-ring, it's missing a big chunk. And this would have probably leaked. Almost certain this would have leaked. So you take the time to do all that rebuild, and then you don't replace these little O-rings or the tubes. You don't inspect them. And then what happens is you put it all back together and it starts to leak. There's some cracking in some of these. They're just plastic tubes. But I pulled one apart. It had a big crack in it. And then when I moved it with my hand, it just come apart. So that would have been leaking. You can tell that it's been leaking for a while out of that tube. And that tube's now broke. Now they make replacement tubes for these that are made out of brass. So that's a nice upgrade. The problem is there's no available OEM parts that are new on these old bikes. So some of this stuff is pretty rare and pretty hard to find. I broke everything down, even the butterfly valve that had never been out. I broke it down to clean all that up. These throttle needles, I'm pretty sure, are original, not been replaced. There's another good example of that right there that's just gummy and stuck in there. To do a complete carb rebuild requires all this, and especially the manual. You've got to kind of follow the manual so you don't get things backwards. And then these are the air fuel mixture screws, and I found that they were not ever replaced. The O-rings in there were not replaced. You can see kind of, let me see if I can get an example. There's one right there. So just half of an O-ring is all that was left in there. And one of these air fuel mixture needles was missing the washer that goes between it and the rubber O-ring. which is a big no-no that would destroy that O-ring. So there was a lot, kind of several issues I found with it that needed to be addressed. So with all the things that were adding up, you know, the part list was getting longer and longer. I called the customer. I messaged the customer. Oh, by the way, that top fuse there, that meter, the manual says this box back here is the meter housing. And I guess meters are kind of, they're calling them like relays. And evidently that first one works the tail light, and that's pretty much all that is. So that's why we had no tail light. We did have a brake light, and that's why fuse kept popping. So there's something in the wiring or the bulb, something going on that is popping that fuse. So that's all that is. But as this list kept growing and growing and growing, it's like, let me reach out to the customer, because I know this bike, he went to buy a bike and this bike was there, and so he kind of picked it up too. So it's not got any sentimental value to him. It was just a pretty cool bike and he picked it up. Let's just check, see how far he wants to go with this. So the list I've got is a starter solenoid, rear cylinder igniter, which you can't find those new, you have to buy them used, a full carb rebuild kit, not just the needles and stuff, air filter, fuel hoses, plugs, carb crossover tubes that were needed. Also on these, let me see if I can find one here somewhere. Yeah. So on these float needle seats, there is a filter, actually, a screened filter that's under that, but they, I guess, bought a generic kit, like a Chinese kit, and see how that's smashed in there? This is not the right filter for that float needle seat. The ones for the float needle seat don't have this plastic thing around them, and they're a lot shorter. So I don't know how well that would have worked either. So to get the proper kit, you can't go cheap on it. You got to get really good kits for those, especially if you're doing 4 of them. So that's a big list for this customer. And not only that, that's just to get the bike running. We don't know, like, what's the conditions of the brakes, the clutch, does it charge? We don't know any of that. And so I called him, he come up, here's what he said. All right, guys, so with all those parts adding up, the customer, I brought him up here, and he just decided, let's just stop. It's adding up. The cost is going to be more than what he was thinking to get it just running. And it's unfortunate. So he's going to actually, I think, part this bike out. So there's a lot of, good original parts on this bike that are really hard to find. So if somebody's restoring an 1100 and can't find some parts, he's got some good parts that he'll be putting for sale on eBay. If you're looking for something off this bike that's been the key for you to restore your bike, reach out to me. I can get you in contact with him. A lot of good parts. That cluster, they're hard to find. The fenders, the carb components, the motor's good. I don't know about the condition, of course, of the stator or the shifting or anything, but it's got a lot of original parts on it, mufflers and exhaust and shocks, just, a lot of good stuff. So that's going to kind of do it for this revival. We didn't revive much. We found some issues, but that's good. I'm glad that, when he first brought the bike up, he just was like, I think I want the carbs going through again just to check them. He was thinking that was going to be all that it needed. So that's exactly why I start with spark and compression, because the fuel stuff is easy. Good grief. You could hold a jug in your hand and ride down the road with just fuel going down into your car. So that's the easy part. The part that runs into a lot of cost and complications is old electrical components needing to work in order for your bike to run properly. And that's exactly what we ran into here. So at this time, I think he's pretty much decided let's stop and let's go ahead and just start parting this bike out on eBay and various places. So that's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, even though even though we didn't get it running, it was fun to go through it. I've never worked on a VF1100 before, a V65 Magna, so it was fun getting to know this bike. I tell you, man, the way they label these cylinders and this setup, it's weird, and the position of the big motor, it's weird, but it was fun. So thank you so much for hanging out in the shop with me today, and tell your mama now I said hi.